How many murderers have been caught and prosecuted over the last 100 years or so? There are no entirely reliable figures, but some research suggests that it comes out at around 65%, depending on the data that you look at. There is another statistic from the US, which could be accurate or not, that over a lifetime, a person walks past or has some sort of interaction with 36 killers. There are probably also figures for the number of people who want to murder their boss for whatever reason, and no doubt try to get away with it in their dreams, which is highly unlikely. That thought of killing his employer was certainly on the mind of William Podmore when it came to his boss Vivian Messiter. It ended up as a landmark case in English criminal history, which was controversial and involved a murder conviction arrived at by a painstaking investigation by the police and from the detailed evaluation of the forensic evidence. It was a cold and rainy Thursday on January the 10th, 1929, that two men found the decomposing, rat-bitten body of a man behind some boxes in a locked garage in Southampton. The premises, in Grove Street, were used as a storeroom by the local agent of the Wolf's Head Oil Company, and the body was later identified as that of their local agent, Vivian Messiter, who had been reported missing. Messiter had not been seen for 9 weeks before his body was discovered, and while the police had checked the garage, they did not pursue any further, since they found it was locked. It was only when a new oil company agent came to take over the garage and it was opened that the gruesome discovery was made. The company finally realized that there had been no contact with him for weeks, and as an ex-army man, this was seen as out of character for their employee. So eventually a worker from Wolf's Head was sent to find out what was happening, and he managed to persuade the local police to break open the garage door that had strangely been locked since Messiter's disappearance. Once inside, the police were shocked to find the badly beaten body of Messiter lying face down on the floor, hidden behind his car and some boxes. Strangely, the car's ignition was still on, and the petrol tank was empty, suggesting the engine had been kept running, muffling the sound of any violence until the fuel had been exhausted. The body having been lying there for some weeks, the police assumed he had been shot due to the small puncture wound on his forehead. At 6:45 p.m., 2 days after the discovery, a telegram from the Chief Constable of Southampton was received at Scotland Yard. It read, "A case of murder has occurred here. A man has been found shot in a room, the door of which was padlocked. The body has probably been in the room some 8 or 9 weeks. Will you please send an officer to investigate the matter?" Scotland Yard sent 2 top officers, Chief Inspector John Prothero and Detective Hugh Young, who later became a distinguished police commander. Messiter had last been seen alive on the 30th of October the previous year, when he failed to return to his lodgings, and his landlord, who was a retired policeman, reported him missing. A bit of a loner, with no real family or friends, Messiter's whereabouts were unknown. It was generally accepted that the 57-year-old had gone off on one of his occasional travels. The police soon began to theorize about the motive of the killing. Messiter had left his home on the day he was last seen, telling his landlord, "I have got to meet a man at 8:45 this morning." A headline from a 1930 newspaper report about the William Podmore case reported that on the day in question that he was pacing up and down in the garage. A mystery man was also there. A neighbour, who lived opposite the building, gave police a description. There were also clues to a secret life when officers prized open a locked trunk at his lodgings. It contained a notebook with letters written in some sort of coded language. They appeared to be love messages that Messer had exchanged with a woman. A critical clue to catching the killer came from a close look into the items found on Messer's body. There was a letter from a W.F. Thomas, who had supposedly replied to an advertisement and applied for a vacancy as a salesman at Wolf's Head. Intriguingly, the same name was found on a screwed-up piece of paper, found discarded elsewhere in the garage. Preliminary examination of the body had revealed a puncture wound over the left eye, which led police to think that Messer had been shot. But further examination by Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the Home Office pathologist, indicated that the real cause of death was multiple severe blows to the skull, so much so that it was fractured everywhere except on top. The examination of the crime scene further revealed the presence of extensive blood marks up to the height of several feet on a wall, which meant that the man had been murdered at the same location. A blood-stained hammer was found near the scene, and when examined, Spilsbury found a hair consistent with that of the eyebrow hair of the dead man. Since the wounds on the victim were also consistent with the hammer, it was Spilsbury's conclusion that the item found discarded by some old oil tins had been wielded with great force and was the probable murder weapon. After reading about the mysterious case in the paper, a man named Mitchell from Downton, near Salisbury, contacted Inspector Prothero about a mechanic he had recently employed. He had introduced himself as Mr. Thomas, but a short while later disappeared, stealing £143 of Mitchell's money in the process. Prothero visited the Southampton Echo newspaper to sift through all of the paper's previous advertisements and files, hunting for this individual by the name of Mr. Thomas. Detectives assigned to the case tracked down the lodgings of the suspect, where the so-called Mr. Thomas had stayed before his disappearance. His departure was so hurried that in his haste he had left many clues behind. The police found a slip of paper that tied him to a car garage in Manchester. The mechanics who worked there matched the description given by Inspector Prothero to one of their previous employees, a man named William Podmore, who was known to the police as he was wanted for fraud. A nationwide manhunt got underway, searching for Podmore and his blonde girlfriend called Lily Hamilton. He was tracked down and arrested in London and was charged and convicted of one of his other crimes and spent 6 months in prison. It would take a while for the police to interview him concerning the murder of Messer. Among various items that were found at the garage was a reply to an advertisement for local sales agents, which was signed William F. Thomas, which the killer had attempted to obscure by pouring oil over it and stamping it repeatedly into the floor. It was concluded that Podmore did indeed work as Messer's assistant, but the police still did not have enough evidence for him to be charged with murder. In the meantime, a breakthrough in the case came with the careful examination of a receipt book for oil sales commissions. Based on a study of indentations between the pages of a genuine receipt made by pencil writing on the sheet above, which had been torn out, it was determined that Podmore had been reporting to Messiter a number of sales to non-existent customers and collecting commissions on these. Police theorised that on learning about this, Messiter had confronted Podmore about the swindle, and Podmore, being aware of the Manchester fraud charge, had lost his nerve and murdered his employer with the hammer. While in prison on the fraud charge, Podmore confessed that he had stolen money from Messiter. This was reported to the authorities, and he was arrested immediately on his release and was charged and sentenced to a further 6 months. During the second term of imprisonment, he spoke to fellow prisoners about the murder. Consequently, 14 months after Messiter's death, the police were certain that they now had enough evidence to charge Podmore with the killing. The trial began in March 1930 at Winchester Assizes. Because it was obvious that Messiter had been repeatedly battered with a hammer, even when unconscious, public opinion was overwhelmingly against the accused. While the hair evidence was played up by the media, it was only part of a painstaking police investigation, although it unquestionably identified the murder weapon. Of greater importance was the receipt book, as well as the testimony of 2 fellow prisoners of Podmore, who stated that he had confessed in their presence. The prosecution alleged the motive was clear. Podmore, who had worked for the oil firm for around 3 months, was a petty thief and conman. Indentations on a receipt book, which had pages torn out of it, revealed Podmore had been reporting bogus oil sales to customers and then claiming the commission. Some of these customers didn't exist, while others actually lived in the north of England rather than Southampton. The prosecution said that Messiter must have confronted him about the fake orders. Already wanted for other crimes, Podmore had panicked. In the witness box, police surgeon Dr. Robert Thomas would be asked to reconstruct the head injuries. A skull, wrapped in tissue paper, was produced from a cardboard box in court. "Will you mark upon the skull where you say the blows were struck?" asked Podmore's lawyer, who was trying to cast doubt on the prosecution's version of events. Dr. Thomas illustrated on the skull where the blows had been struck. But it was another witness who provided compelling testimony, called Joseph Diaz, who had been an inmate at Wandsworth Prison and assigned to cell 48. Podmore was next to him in cell 47, and they soon got talking. Diaz recognised Podmore's name. "Are you thinking about that case you read about in the paper?" said Podmore. Diaz asked him how he was getting on with it. Podmore replied, "Washout." Later on, Podmore told him to be very careful about what he said. He disclosed he'd been working in Southampton and had been at a garage. He'd asked his boss for money several times. Podmore told Diaz, "He never gave it me. Then I lose my temper. I take up a hammer. I hit him at the back of the head." Confident of his acquittal, Podmore bragged, "The old farmers in Hampshire don't know how to try a man." Unfortunately for him, the court, led by Attorney General Sir Thomas Inskip, provided the jury with a very clear motive for murder. It turned out that Messiter had confronted Podmore after being repeatedly tricked into paying commission on fake orders. After the killing, he had grabbed Messiter's watch and chain, cigarette case, £3 and a key. He would go on to sell the items for £15, according to Diaz. The ex-prisoner would later tell the court. He said he locked the door and the same afternoon left Southampton. Podmore continued to protest his innocence throughout the trial. The jury was out deliberating for 1 hour and 23 minutes before they returned with a guilty verdict. Before being sentenced to death, the defendant said, "I still repeat, I know nothing whatever about it." A national outcry of sympathy poured in for Podmore, as many saw him as a petty criminal rather than a murderer. This appears to have been based largely on public mistrust of the prison witnesses to whom Podmore had allegedly confessed, as the public could not believe that Podmore would have confessed a capital crime to complete strangers in circumstances where he would almost certainly be found out. The case had been unusual in some respects, because the accused was convicted despite there being no witnesses. But back in Abbey Halton, where he grew up, his family and others who knew him from his days as a local motor mechanic were convinced it was a miscarriage of justice. The Stoke-on-Trent protesters wrote, "We strongly urge the Home Secretary advise His Majesty the King to grant a reprieve." The killer's brother said at the very least they hoped for a retrial to clear his name. There were even reports of somebody coming forward with startling new evidence. But by then, an appeal to the High Court had already been dismissed. William Podmore was hanged on the 22nd of April 1930 at Winchester Prison.